Welcome to No Gods, No Master Volumes, a podcast by two pedal nerds talking about pedals, sometimes with other pedal nerds. I'm Simon, I'm a record producer, musician, and I make pedal demos as Tunnel of Reverb.
And I'm Guion. I run Holy Island Audio, a one-man effects pedal operation from Cardiff in Wales.
This episode, we are joined by Dr. John Snyder of Electronic Audio Experiments, Doctor of Dirt with a PhD in fat riffs. You may know John from EAE's epic catalogue of pedals or through their collaborations with artists such as Pyle and Touche Amore. We discussed the history of the company and John's musical endeavours that exist alongside it.
The Doctor will see you now.
Well, you're going to need a supercomputer running multiple copies of RX to clean out this audio.
I got you.
Cool. All righty. Well, thank you both for having me on.
Of course.
Nice to actually be doing this. I've been looking forward to it for a while. Yeah. I don't know. Sorry, my brain's a little bit of a scrambled egg at the moment, but
oh, you're good. How was the show?
it was great. This is my first time out in Portland. Honestly, I had just been looking for an excuse to go because it's a cool city. I know a lot of people there. You can throw a rock and hit like 3 pedal companies anywhere you go. And so it was nice to kind of like see how all that was working out. I was staying with Chris Benson, who very kindly let me sleep in his guest bedroom. And man, he's got just the nicest little, like house compound thing going on. He and his wife have some really sweet kids that got a bunch of goats. And then out in the back, Chris has this huge barn where it's the wood shop for Benson amps, and then also his sort of like private development lab. And, so he's got that sort of space all to himself. And then they've got a proper shop like in Portland itself, where they do, pedal production and amp wiring and all that stuff. And then they've got another warehouse where they do all the cabinetry and upholstering for the combos and head shells. So it's quite an operation they have going. So I got to see all that stuff. And, we went out with Alex from Mass Distro, and he treated us like a king. It was great. I definitely ate very well when I was out there. And then, the expo itself was good. You never know what to expect at these things, but, got to see a lot of people, and it was nice to actually, always good to see folks from other pedal companies too. Jesse from 29 Pedals came out. Fairfield even sent somebody out, which was awesome because that company is like mysterious as hell.
It's like an enigma.
Yeah. So it was cool. It was a good time. Oh, we also, we got to go to a show at, there's this venue in downtown Portland called Doug Fir, which is an amazing sounding room. But we saw Dream Decay, which is Alex from Science Amps band. Absolutely killer post-punk if you haven't listened to them. And then this band Fax from Chicago, who I'd never heard before, but they're like, just a really good noise rock power trio. I couldn't believe how good their drummer was. Like one of those drummers, you see how hard he's hitting and you're like, oh, I'm in for like a really good show. And it was awesome. I cannot recommend both of those bands enough. So just a good time in general.
That's a solid weekend.
Yeah. It definitely doesn't get much better than that. So also, since it's tomorrow, I can spill the beans. We're announcing sending tomorrow.
Sick.
Reason being that it's the 5-year anniversary of the original release, and while we're not going to be selling units until like mid to late July, because of the sort of scope of this, I kind of wanted to like sort of trickle out information for the weeks leading up to the actual like sellable date for these. So. And we're really playing it down to the wire because, as Simon knows, we have not sent out the beta units yet. And that's because our lovely enclosure vendors who have never messed up an order before, they messed up big time. And it's just one of those things. It's just pure bad luck on everybody's side. But we had like a print that was shifted over by like 1.5 millimeters.
Oh, man.
And so it just looks, it was like, I can't sell these, not for the price we're trying to charge for these. So, but at least we can get the word out, get some nice photos on the internet and end the years of silence for this thing. So exciting week over here.
That's such a huge milestone to get to as well. Like actually being able to be like, it's done. Like it's finished.
Yeah. To be able to just, say like, all right, I'm finally pushing this baby out of the nest here,
Yeah.
It certainly took me long enough.
I mean, like you've told me like the feature set and everything it has compared to the original, which I'm one of the like lucky people who has one, and I've used it on my board since pretty much the day I got it. Like this. And, the amount that you've added to it is crazy to me. Like it shows how much work it's been.
Yeah, I mean, I would say at this point, it is a different pedal in all but name.
Yeah.
Which, honestly, we even thought about changing the name just to get out from the associations of the original. But I realized that the associations with the original were positive. And so, and sending V2 had kind of become like a shibboleth among people who were following the company. It was like this, it was turning into like a bit of a Half-Life 3 situation where it's like, is this thing ever going to actually come out, or is John just going to pursue different projects forever? And I wanted to, I realized like the opportunity with that one is, here, let me get it out of my bag. This is the one pedal that I did not ship back from Portland. I had to fly with it because as of right now, it is the only one that is fully functional.
You don't want to risk that.
And so here it is. And all the 680p glory of this webcam here. This thing has it's essentially like a rack style analog delay. It's 15 volt bipolar power rails. It's got way more filtering, way more sort of dynamics tricks, a way more sophisticated preamp than you would typically see in like a pedal format. And then if that wasn't enough, there is an entire motherboard grafted onto this, which is basically it's handling a series of several control voltages and clock signals and that sort of thing, which are just being passed to the analog board. So if I was a smarter person, I would have just said, okay, we're going to take the analog board and release just that as a Eurorack module and cut the bill of materials cost in half. But no, I had to do this wild digitally controlled analog thing and cram it all into a box. But so every single one of those knobs is accessible via MIDI CCs and can be saved as a preset. Including the gain, all the delay controls, the mix, all the LFO stuff. And there's a lot of infrastructure that had to go into it to make it, like an actionable thing. And also not draw, an amp off the wall either. So the thing, and I think as game people, you'll both appreciate this. The way we set up this color control, which is sort of an artifact of the original, was there's this discrete preamplifier, which the one in the V1 actually became the Halberd. After many years of iterating on that design. I didn't want to put an entire Halberd into a delay pedal because that would have just been completely nuts thing to do. And so instead, I designed a new preamp, and then I said, well, we've got digital controls, so we could do some interesting things with this. And so this preamp is sandwiched between a series of voltage-controlled amplifiers that essentially let you level the gain as you turn it up. And so as you're increasing the sort of overdrive and like harmonics and whatnot of this preamp stage, you're also keeping the output leveled. And what that means is that you can overdrive the delay line pretty heavily without it getting super loud, because I didn't want to put a master volume on this delay pedal. And that was the only reason. There is a master volume control that's baked in as an alternate function. You can kind of go below the panel, so to speak, and tweak some set and forget controls. And that's one of them, is to just trim the volume a little bit. But that was one of those just weird hyperfixations that, did that have to happen? No, but I really wanted it to. And so it did. But yeah, anyway, so that's been my week, is getting ready to get this thing out the door, traveling a bunch, meeting some cool people, eating some wild food, thinking way too much about delay. It's been good. It's been good.
That's awesome. And there's just been the flanger release from Hawker as well.
Yes.
Were you working on that with him?
Yeah. So Hawker he's taught me a lot of what I know, especially about the more, sophisticated side of analog electronics. I mean, I would consider him to be the kind of world expert in BBD technology. Especially with a lot of the quirks and nuances that come in when you're really trying to understand, the sort of level above these things, like just so many things, like, oh, how does the frequency response of a BBD and the gain change with clock frequency, is not something that people who are making like a Boss DM2 clone think about. But if you're trying to make, like a high bandwidth delay beast, then that's something you really have to think about a lot. And that's especially true with a flanger, because the clock frequency has to span, it's around 6 to 8 octaves of operation. So all this to say, he absolutely took the reins on this design process, but he likes to send me prototypes and kind of get my sanity check, partly because I have, a we've got a lot of amps and guitars here. We've got lots of folks with different different backgrounds and strong critical listening abilities. I think especially between myself and Brad and Miranda, we can pretty quickly suss out if a pedal sounds good. And it really did take the whole team to like get to the bottom of some of the things that we liked and didn't like about those earlier prototypes. And like especially the drive control, it's such a hard thing to get right. Like this one knob drive control, we wanted it to just sound a little better and then get to some interesting territory when you turned it up. But my background is like post rock and noise rock and alternative whatever stuff. Brad is kind of similar to me. Miranda is too. She has a really wide ranging music taste. But then Hawker listens to like jam bands and stuff like that. And so, and don't get me wrong, like I appreciate the Grateful Dead, especially for their contributions on the technical side of things. But it's not the kind of music I typically listen to. And so, for us to meet in the middle and come up with something that sounded good for everybody was shockingly difficult. But the rest of it came together pretty naturally. I mean, just we wanted a really huge LFO range. We wanted it to get like wicked slow. We wanted to be able to do the static comb filtering because I'm such a Misty Cave fanboy, and at the end of the day, that thing is a parked flanger. And then one of Hawker's trademarks is like the phase switch to change the phase in which the feedback signal is fed back in, or the phase in which the comb filter is combined with the original signal. And those have dramatic changes because, normal comb filter kind of is, U-shaped, like it kind of goes up. But if you invert the phase, then it becomes kind of M-shaped. Actually, I think it's the other way around. But that really kind of goes from like the classic flanger jet plane sound to this like weird kind of like hollowed out like tubular filter thing, which is just really really interesting and rare. And then we kind of had the idea to include the envelope follower, which a lot of Frank Zappa fans have picked up on this because that was a signature part of his playing technique. But it actually came from Hawker using his older flanger pedal, which he designed over at Moog, with an expression pedal. And he just wanted to not have to do it with an expression pedal. Like he kind of liked using it almost like a filter or wah-wah pedal type thing. And the convergent evolution with the Zappa sound is pretty interesting because now we've got a bunch of Zappa fans emailing us being like, oh, well, did you know that he used two of these things with one going up, one going down, all this stuff? And we're like, listen, man, we just thought envelope flanger was cool. Yeah. Like you guys can sort this one out on your own. Because like this is already, this would be like if I made a Shredmaster pedal and a bunch of Radiohead fans were like, well, did you know that blah 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 blah? I'm like, listen, I like Radiohead. They're one of my favorite bands, but like I don't need to. I'm not trying to clone Johnny Greenwood in a vat. Okay, like I just thought this sounded good, and so we're kind of getting a similar sort of thing as that, but.
Getting the diehards coming out.
I mean, you'll get those fan bases with those sorts of artists as well that are just like everything has to be down to a T and they know everything inside out as well.
Oh, absolutely. And that's, it's tough because those people get really excited about this stuff, but then they're impossible to please. It's a very difficult 100%. Thing. It's like, because there's always going to be, for all someone, some artists who fell in love with a particular piece of gear, theirs might be modified or it might just literally be broken. Or, it turns out that the whole magic was whoever was sitting behind the recording desk using like a really nice, compressor or, room sound or mic, you just don't know sometimes these things. And I find that fascinating, but also it's encouragement to like stay in your lane and make your own shit a little bit. Just be like, listen, this is my approach to this thing. This is what I want to do. I'm not trying to measure this against anything else. I just want it to be what it is. That's a powerful driving sentiment behind what we typically try to do.
Definitely. Did you get any of that with the release for Pile as well? Did you get any diehard Pile fans?
We had some people being like, well, I don't understand how this fits into their music, which I can a little bit see because the usage of those effects tends to be very subtle. Honestly, on the guitar side, most of that was octave up, down. We kind of put our nod to like the Pog sound in there. And obviously the fidelity is not there because for a variety of reasons, their pitch shifting algorithms are just incredibly well done. There's a guy, I don't remember his name, but Matt Farrow knows him, who just is like a legend in that space. And he's worked for EHX for a long time, designed some cool algorithms. I was never going to get to that, but we wanted to at least throw that kind of cold octave up and down thing in there. But the from the sort of production side of things, the jump from from their record in 2018 to the solo material to to All Fiction, like the most recent album, was years of just having the time and space to experiment with effects and sounds. And the sort of germ of the Mirror House was actually Rick's got a Prophet 6, I think. I don't remember the exact model number, but there's a knob that's labeled slop, and as you turn it up, it just adds. I think what it's doing is it's kind of emulating the behavior of an analog synthesizer that has fallen out of tune. Like if you want, especially if you're doing like hard sync with two voices, to be able to keep those in tune over temperature and years of use and capacitor drift and all that fun stuff is a serious undertaking, which is why most of those synthesizers are digitally controlled and calibrate themselves constantly. But because of that, it actually can sound a little bit too clinical. And so this knob basically forces the oscillators out of sync with one another. And it's kind of like a detune, but it's also kind of based on the velocity of the note that's coming in, to emulate that sort of instability of these old synths. So that was like our starting point. And so I had the idea to include this sort of envelope controlled detuning so you could get that kind of sloppy, like miscalibrated effect, but on demand with guitar by just sort of playing differently. And so that effect got used obviously a lot on the synthesizer voices, but it inspired the vocal effects and some of the guitar processing on that record too. And so rather than like, Limelight, for instance, was me designing a pedal, sending it to the band, they sent it back to me, we tweaked it, and then they used it on the record. Like in a very intentional way. This was like, how do we combine these techniques and kind of experiences into like a cohesive thing? And I thought it was pretty interesting. What would be really funny is if it ends up on a future record, because that will be kind of, it'll be an interesting full circle moment. But that was almost we're not trying to achieve the Pile sound, but instead we're letting Rick use his sensibilities to sound design a pedal. And then of course there's me trying to meet him where he's at with that, and that was the result. So it was an interesting one. It's a very strange pedal. But
yeah, it's what got me like excited about it was the fact that it felt like it was just something that he wanted, and that him going like, I can't get this, like I really want a pedal that does this, and I was just like, I think I want that as well.
Yeah. I think that's the cool part too, is this sort of loop of wanting a particular sound, realizing that it hasn't been achieved yet, and then then making that, and then having this almost relief that your interests aren't as unique as they think they are, because it's a way to like connect with other people, and and then people can take that sound and interpret it for themselves, and then make their own records. I mean, that's what makes this whole thing worthwhile, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm. Oh, totally. And you just did the second pre-order run of those, right? They shipped like a month ago or so.
Yeah, we were, because what's funny is that like we knew we realized we screwed up big time with like the amount that we had made available, and so we were like, all right, we're gonna make some more of these, but Pile's going on tours, which means that Miranda, who works for us and also does front of house for them, it is also our fastest assembler, was gone for that time as well. So it was like, well, we're just gonna make these when she gets back, and and as soon as she got back, she like crushed that batch super quickly, but. We definitely were a little behind for a while there.
It was great that you could do another run of them, because I remember they went in like 2 minutes or something.
Oh yeah, it was wild. We did not expect that. Because the pedal market has quieted down a little bit. I think we were in this very much like pandemic era boom of pedal sales. Mm-hmm. Folks were bored at home, and pedals make being bored at home a lot less boring. We can all relate to that, and so I think there's this kind of fight for relevancy, which is cool because it's forcing people to make more interesting and unique offerings. But also it's a little bit scarier too, right? We didn't want to like front, so many units that people weren't going to buy them. And that's always the struggle in this, is to be like, well, are you making enough? Are you making too much? Like anybody with a decent pedal idea that's gaining some traction can, like, if you scrounge up some money, you can flood the market. It's not impossible. If you have an idea that you really want, like there are contract manufacturers who will basically say, yeah, we'll work on like a year-long thing. We'll build 1,000 of these, and you can put them all on Sweetwater, and pay us when you're done. And like, yeah, like you can do that, but that's a dangerous way to go, because if those don't sell, then like, you're on the hook.
Yeah.
So but that is like a thing that people do. And so there's always that gamble, right? Of like, are you making enough or you're not making enough? And then of course, there's always the accusations of artificial scarcity, or you can never truly get around that. It's like, well, the scarcity is real. It's me. I'm one human, and also the laws of thermodynamics apply. Resources are finite, especially, like we've done the best we can to get, handmade processes out of there. But like, if you're hand wiring and hand screening stuff, it's like a wonder that anybody can get anything at all. It's like, you should be lucky that you get these pedals.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think people forget that a lot as well. Like, it's so quick for people to not realize they're talking to just one person building stuff. Do you find, like, because you're obviously working in a team now, is that just like something that's naturally had to occur, or was that something that you were planning from the beginning to expand in that way?
It absolutely was not something I anticipated. There was a while where I had kind of a small circle of people who were helping me out on a part-time basis. Like, I became friends with Brad because we lived down the street from one another and didn't know it. And I realized, like, I was in school at the time, and so my time was really limited. I was building pedals like nights and weekends, and it got to the point where my now wife was like, you need to rest a little bit, like you need to spend more time with me. And I was so like kind of deep in this hole, where I was like, yeah, no, you're right. Like, my social life is in shambles. And so it got to the point where I was like, Brad, can you just help me with like assembly, because he has his own pedal company. And he was busy with that, but he was willing to make some time to help me build like metal model fets and stuff like that. And we had a good thing going, because I could just drive pedals over to his house, or drive parts over to his house, and then he would drive pedals back to mine. And so he and I had been working together for a while. And then once I finished school, which was right at the start of COVID, I defended my thesis in May 2020. And I thought I was going to go get a real job, and nobody, none of the places I've been interviewing at called me back, because, it was a hiring freeze. I was a fresh graduate. And also, I didn't go. What I learned very late in the game was that most of the people who want to hire electronics PhDs are military contractors, and I had a hard line against working in that industry. So my job options were kind of truncated, both artificially and through very materialistic means. And as a result, I was like, well, I'm just going to do this pedal thing. And at that point, I knew I was going to need some help, because otherwise, I would either be building pedals all day while the emails pile up, or I would be answering emails all day while the orders pile up. And both of those kind of suck. So I said, all right, well, I'm going to have by then Brad and his wife had moved out of the city, and so I would drive pedals, an hour and a half out to to not quite that long, but like 45 minutes out to his place, and and then 2 weeks later come back and drive everything, and then do mail order in my apartment. And that worked for a while, but my apartment is very small, and I also have a dog, and so we were like, all right, there's dog hair in the packages, and I'm sick of carrying these like big boxes of pedals up and down like our tiny spiral staircase. And it was so that was kind of what motivated like us moving into a shop and having some space, and having everyone in one place makes it a lot easier too. It's so much easier to do things when it's like, hey, can you give me a hand with this? Or, hey, we got an email from this vendor about this thing, and also I think we all kind of feed off of each other's energy in a way that's really, it's really positive. And so I definitely didn't think this was what I was going to be doing. And I didn't think that I was going to need help, but realizing it and then bringing folks on was an absolute game changer for me. It certainly helped with the work-life balance and all that too. So, very, very grateful for the other folks we've got here.
I mean, that is important as well, especially when it's like you are a one-man operation, or you're seen as that. It's so tied to your personality, because I get it as well, where I feel if I haven't responded to someone quick enough, or I haven't emailed someone back, and I feel guilty, and it's like, it does get pretty heavy. You do need to take yourself out of the environment sometimes. So it probably helps to have that space.
Yeah, I mean, you got folks thinking you're Amazon.com, like, why didn't you, I placed this order 3 hours ago. Why didn't you ship yet? And it's like, man, I don't know. I still got to build your order.
Yeah.
I got to order the parts to build your order because, there was a dozen of you and that's really exciting for me. But also like, again, I'm just one guy, I gotta make lunch at some point. I don't know what to tell you. And that doesn't go away when you scale, but it does get easier. But it has been funny, the one thing I really didn't expect in all this was that was kind of being, like the face of the company as it grew. Because, like obviously, like I like putting myself out there, and I like, the sense of community and all that. But what I wasn't expecting was being the most extroverted person in the organization, because it's a very low bar to clear. At very least, the most online person, But going and like doing trade shows and stuff like that, I think because if it's something I'm interested in, I can ramble about it for a long time, and people mistake that for being friendly, which works in my favor.
Yeah.
And I have met a lot of people who I genuinely really enjoy talking to, and that helps as well. But every once in a while, I'll just be kind of standing there while just like some random dude is playing like like John Mayer riffs through this demo board while I've got the headphone splitter on, and I'm just like, why am I here?
Yeah.
Like this is not what I signed up for. Yeah. So having some guardrails on that engagement is helpful, but it is an interesting place you find yourself in, and I have this conversation with friends who have pedal companies, friends who are musicians, especially people who have like a smaller bands where the only way it works economically is if they don't hire a PR person, or at least don't have a PR person full time, don't have a manager, So suddenly it's like, honestly, I've had this conversation with Rick from Pile a few times. They keep everything very, very small so that the band is self-sustaining. It's economically viable to do what they do. And, it's a lot easier when you don't have essentially middle management types taking a cut of that all the time. But the way that you pay for that is you have to constantly put yourself out there. The algorithm is demanding its daily pound of flesh, and and that can be really exhausting, and it absolutely leads to burnout. I've also had this conversation with demo artists too, and without speaking for people, like I know that it's exhausting to be like, hey, there's new releases happening all the time, and you're part of that content creation machine. You have to constantly be putting yourself out there for the people who their brand is talking in front of the camera and playing. That can be really exhausting because you've got to constantly be thinking of fresh things to say, and you don't want to resort to clickbait. You have to have an authentic presentation. But at some point, it's like, wow, great! I'm demoing my 50th overdrive pedal in the last 2 years, and the people who made this probably think it's cool, but like for me, it's the 50th overdrive pedal that I've seen. Yeah. So like, I'm feeling a little fucking done.
Yeah.
And
it's like, what can I say?
Yeah. You just kind of run out of things after a while, and that's I don't know what the antidote to. I mean, I do know what the antidote to that is. It's it's moving away from like a capitalist implementation of this industry, but we all got bills to pay, so I don't see that changing anytime soon. So it's very, very hard to meet that balance. I don't know the right answer. I think treating it like an art project is the thing that is most satisfying for me personally. To say, I'm manufacturing a product, I'm selling it to people, but at the end of the day, we're making things for ourselves and then hoping that folks like that.
Well, that's what we were talking to Evan from Dirge about as well. Like, you keep it exciting for yourself by keeping your art like first and foremost thing, and it's like I find it with recording as well. Like, I have to be making that art that I'm really proud of, otherwise I've got to do something else otherwise. Yeah. I mean, I'm sure you've had to record some bands that you just like were not connecting with, and I mean, it's kind of like the same thing as someone having some poor demo person having to do another Tube Screamer clone. It just gets a little old, and you got to be. It's hard to stay professional about it too when you're faced with this sort of like hyper personalization aspect of it too. Yeah, and I feel like that's come out even more recently in pedals, where like the builders are like on the front line almost, like whether it's like in Discord or on Instagram or in like YouTube things. Like, you're being put out there, and people are hearing, and they want to hear your personal opinions about stuff as well, right? Yeah. And I like to talk about this stuff. I mean, like,
I mean, like I'm really interested in having conversations with both of you. Like, I think both of you do excellent work, and I'm interested in what you have to say. So I carved out time in my life to make this happen because it's important to me.
It's rad. Thank you.
I could be saying no to these things, and there are some things I probably should say no to. We don't have to do every single event that we sign up for, but so it's like on my side, like being extra enthusiastic about this stuff all the time. I have to be mindful of the like sort of the backswing exhaustion of it all, coming back from a weekend of traveling and then being like, I have to sleep for like an entire day because I've been talking to people for essentially like, 48 hours nonstop.
Yeah, you're just on the whole time. And you have to, it's part of the job, right?
It's a super odd fatigue as well. It's such an unnatural thing to just stand and talk to people. You don't realize you're doing it when you're talking about stuff that you've made as well. Because I've only ever, I did like an expo recently. I guess it wouldn't be recent now, but it was like the first time I'd done something and I was like, I don't even know if I can do this. Because afterwards I was knackered. Driving home was horrible because it was just,
my God, yeah.
It just drains you. And I'm also like, you'll get people playing AC/DC riffs and you almost want to be like, oh, don't do that. Don't do that. The guitar's in drop B. It can't play that. Don't do it. But you almost want to tell them, and every time they play something, you want to explain like, oh no, I changed this on this for this reason. And that weird that drive to have to explain everything is like so strangely exhausting. But it's like, it's not that it's not an enjoyable experience, but it's definitely can suck the life out of you.
It's true. Well, now you got me. I want to hear a band that sounds exactly like AC/DC, but all the guitars are in drop B and they're all going through a plague pit.
Simon, you're recording that demo, aren't you?
Yeah. To be fair, I am mixing your record, so.
Very true. That is essentially how I play guitar. So. Yeah.
But yeah, no, I mean, that honestly, the closest thing I can think of in terms of that level of like energy drain is like touring,
Yeah.
I haven't done a ton of touring, but I did enough to know that I should not be doing it very often, right? It was, it's very satisfying. It's great to travel. It's great to play music with your friends. But eating lunch at 7-Eleven every single day is bad for the body and should be treated as such. So, there's always the pros and cons of it all. Or it's like, honestly, with like some bands I've been in, it was like every night on tour was a party, and it's like that's not a way to live life. It's fun for like 2-3 days, and then you're just like, oh, my body.
Are you still finding time to be able to sort of work on music yourself? Because it's a difficult balance, I think. Like actively saying, right, I'm not going to work today. I'm not going to work on stuff that's going to pay the bills today. I'm going to work on things for myself. It's a difficult balance.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, it's funny because like, and I'm sure you experience this a lot too. Being like, I got to make an Instagram reel today. Am I going to use a riff that I was saving for something meaningful, or am I going to spit this out for 30 seconds of dopamine on the internet for somebody? At this point, I've just kind of leaned into it. And I'm using Instagram reels to workshop riffs for projects, so it kind of is a win-win.
Literally, that's me as well, yeah.
And we started like an EAE shop band. Brad and I have a buddy of ours playing drums, Damon from Sunbeamer. Who definitely check out his stuff. He also has that label Folded Note Records, which is really good. It's like Eurorack ambient stuff. But he's also a great drummer. And so we're just, doing our touch and go records worship bullshit. I've been trying to write a record around the Obstructors guitar because it's such a weird instrument, and it really fights you. From 10,000 feet up, it's doing what a Travis Bean would do. But in reality, it's far more sort of dangerous. The Travis Beans came from the 70s, and if you dial them in right, you can play very classic sounds with them. It wasn't until like the 90s when people were buying them for cheap and then using them in a particular way that they kind of garnered this association. And even like if you think about Dwayne Dennison, right? Like his background is in like classic rock and rockabilly and stuff like that, and that was where all his playing came from. So it was like this classic sort of mindset. The Travis Bean is like if the Obstructors would be like if aliens found a TB500 and put it in like a Star Trek replicator and just made it out of metal. And it's like a horrifying instrument. You can get nice sounds out of it if you're careful, but it's one that you really have to fight with, which makes it incredible to play. So I've been trying to write music around this, and it's been a very, very interesting time. And so we're working on that record slowly but surely. I'm going to be stepping in the vocal booth again for that one, which I'm dreading, but should be fun. I blew out my voice back in the day, so it'll be fun to see what happens. Doing this again in a less. I was in like post-hardcore screamo bands, So yeah, we're looking forward to it. I also I have a new Ember Wreath record that is almost done. It's actually in mastering with my friend Matthew right now, which I'm really excited about. They also mastered the Verdigris record and just did a phenomenal job with it. So that's really fun. Yeah, we tracked Miranda and I tracked that over a couple of sort of isolated sessions over at Machines and Magnets, which is a very cool studio here in New England. That's where I know The Body has done a bunch of records there. It's where Battles used to record. Who else? I think that's also where Big Brave does most of their material. Just an amazing. Lingua Ignota also, Kristen records there. Actually, I used a dulcimer that I think was on a couple of her records for some overdubs. So I'm very excited to see what comes out of that. It was like I had over lockdown, I recorded probably around 30 or 40 hours of like improvised drone material, which I just slowly whittled down into usable chunks. I think maybe 10 minutes of it ended up on the record, which means that some of it will either get chopped up and used in another capacity, or I might just say, I don't know. I like to have a DAW running when I do this stuff, just to, if there's a good moment, you always want to be able to capture that for later. But it was a very interesting experience doing all that, and recording at that studio was phenomenal. And Miranda's a great engineer, so we got to have fun with all the weird rack reverbs and stuff they've got there, and using the rooms and experimenting with mic placement. We did some really weird mid-side stuff on that dulcimer that we used. So it was generally just a fun time all around. But so I've been able to find space for these things where I can, and it totally keeps me sane. It's an excuse to use all these pedals that I've accumulated. It's an excuse to actually play the guitar in a way that is just for me and not for anybody else. I really am grateful for that. But I really had a hard time with it for a long time, because it was just like when I was in school and building pedals part-time, I did nothing else. It was impossible. Now I have some semblance of work-life balance and can actually get away with it, which is it's good. It helps a lot.
I think it's important to do it when you can, because I've had the same thing where I'll be like working on music all day or doing a demo all day, and then I'm just like, the last thing I want to see is a guitar right now. Like, I don't want to hear anything.
Yeah, exactly. That's why Miyazaki gave us Elden Ring,
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that's where I've been spending most evenings.
Just gotta get mad at a boss instead of mad at a circuit,
Yeah, well, I mean, I felt like there was that sort of link between in your naming of circuits and pedals and stuff. There's quite like an obvious sort of fantasy link there, isn't there, with the halberd and the. Every time I pick up a weapon or something, I'm like, oh, there it is.
Yeah, that's definitely true. Between FromSoft games and D&D, I've been in a regular D&D campaign for several years now with my my wife and my very closest friends, that is like probably the thing I care the most about outside of like pedals and music, that it's absolutely what kept me sane over the sort of like darkest parts of lockdown too, was just like, at least being able to, my wife and I, our two best friends, live like down the street from us, so we were able to meet up every weekend to play D&D. And, a good dose of escapism really makes my life a lot better. So it was a strong net positive. And yeah, those influences leak in from all over the place, Also makes it easier to name stuff if I've got a theme.
Yeah, I mean, it immediately resonated with me, those names. It's sort of like you can really, you really find your people when you see a name like that, and you're like, oh, I immediately know that this is going to be something that I'm interested in. It breaks that barrier immediately.
Well, I appreciate that. Thank you.
It's funny, isn't it? How it sticks with you. Like, you wouldn't think like Longsword is just like fairly simple name, but I remember as well. I think it was the first pedal of yours I saw at a studio somewhere, and I was just like, I want to try that. I want to plug that in.
Got to get people's attention, you know.
Yeah.
And I think honestly, I think the Holy Island naming convention is incredible too. Because
oh yeah, that's a good one.
I've talked to folks about this before, where it's like, you know, it's not an obvious. There's not like an obvious trend in all the names, but it's like the second you hear it, you're like, oh, I know exactly who made this. And I think the only other company that pulls that off, that in my opinion, is Caroline Guitar Company. You can always tell if it's a Caroline pedal based on their naming convention. And I'd love to know how they did it, but they sure as hell did it. You know, and I remember. You know, the same way, Simon, that you saw the longsword, you were like, "Yes, I got to try this." That was my experience with the Wave Cannon. You know, I was in a guitar shop here in Boston, and I you know, I saw that on the shelf, and I was like, "I've got to play this thing. Like, it just looks so cool." And I bought it. I tried it, and I bought it on the spot. And that was my main overdrive for years. Because it just did the thing that I wanted. It was that into a V4. Was like, you know, all my band's old records and stuff like that. So, you know, simpler times.
Oh, I mean, that sounds like the perfect combo anyway. It's why mess with it? Well, I mean, unless you're designing circuits yourself. It's,
that was the problem, because I was like, oh, what else could I do with this? That was one of the circuits that inspired the longsword, because you know, and I didn't know this at the time, but the Wave Cannon is kind of in the Rat lineage. But all I knew was that it was an op amp drive, and so I was like, okay, I got to make an op amp drive. And I was never able to make it sound like the Wave Cannon, and so I just kept adding shit to it, and that was what turned into the longsword. You know, not that I was trying to make it sound like the Wave Cannon, but it was like, it's got to be as good as this. You know, it's got to be as compelling. You know, I could put them side by side and do even more with it, but instead of getting even close to that, like my knowledge was so rudimentary at the time. This was probably like 2014, early 2015 when I was doing this. You know, it just became its own thing. You know, and at the time, I was living in a basement apartment in Boston, and during the winter of 2015, we got around 110 inches of snow. So we were just getting, you know, blizzards like every single weekend. And so, you know, me living in this basement apartment, we'd literally like wait for the snow to clear out. We'd dig ourselves out. We'd run down to the bottom of the hill we lived on, like stock up on like beer and frozen pizza and take it back up, because it was like, I don't know when we're going to be able to go back out again. I couldn't even take my car up and down this hill because it was a pretty steep hill that we lived on. And, you know, the streets were, you know, were just a mess all the time. Like the city like could barely keep up with it. And so it was like time to provision up, but I had my breadboard. And so, you know, I spent many long hours, like, you know, trying out all these different things. And, you know, when I was teaching myself Eagle, you know, doing my first, like, just horrifically ugly auto-routed board with, like, the wrong packages for everything, and, you know, trying to solder that up. And it didn't even fit in the enclosure it was in because all the wires, it was like, you know, it was like probably 10 feet of wire in this pedal.
Yeah.
But that was the first longsword, and we actually used it on a couple of recordings. Just, you know, it was just sitting on the studio desk, just in its unhoused glory. Just like barely, you know, it would like cut out in the middle of the take and I have to like jiggle some wires to get it going again. Yeah. Again, simpler times, right?
Yeah, man.
Was that your like first dive into building pedals? That kind of.
So for about a year before that, so I had the electronic audio experiments like Tumblr, you know, and during those days I was just building like Vero circuits for friends of mine. You know, I wanted to be Atomium amps when I grew up. You know, the guy from Rosetta who had that awesome Tumblr blog. You know, and I was dabbling in amp repair, and I really mean dabbling. I look back now at some of the stuff I did then. I actually have tracked down a couple of the amps I fixed back in the day and made it right. And because like I thought I knew what I was doing, but I didn't. You know, and so it was really interesting to like you know, to start to try to do my own stuff. Because like I had taken a couple electronics classes in undergrad, but you know, the gulf between what works in, you know, if you're doing a circuit problem on an exam and it's an op amp and you say, okay, calculate the output voltage as a function of the input voltage. You know, you could do that, right? And it might even be interesting, but it doesn't tell you anything about what it's actually doing. It doesn't tell you what it's for. It certainly doesn't tell you what it sounds like. And it doesn't tell you if it's going to be worth a shit on guitar. So it was like, you know, to be able to go from like, okay, I've got this rough assemblage of textbook knowledge to actually making a thing took a lot longer than I thought. And so, doing clone builds kind of helped me like learn a thing or two. And this was back when it was just all Vero board. There weren't like PCB mills like selling like, okay, here's a clone of your favorite overdrive. You can just buy this and paint by numbers. It was a lot more like rough and tumble. And I often found myself modding the stuff that I was making too. So it'd be like, oh well, we did an EP boost and it sounds okay, but I'm gonna put a diode clip around it or something like that, just to like give it something. And so various friends of mine, I'll have those, and most of them are probably broken. I occasionally see them on Reverb and buy them back because I'm a little embarrassed, but I had to start somewhere, right? And but I knew that was going to be a springboard into designing my own stuff. And so when I finally had the space to do so, by virtue of being snowed in for a while, I was able to sit down and make this longsword idea. And the V1 is so different from what we currently make today, because every time I would revisit it, I would often it was like, okay, I got to update the layout for manufacturing purposes. Might as well open up the simulation and tweak a bunch of stuff, and then listen to that, and then order prototypes of that, and then tweak it again, and then people be like, well, you've made a longsword in a year, and I'm like, I know, it's got to be perfect, right? But finally I've chilled out on that one. Thank God. Can only if there's ever a longsword version 5, I think people are going to like come out here with torches and pitchforks.
Are you at 4.5 now?
Yeah, a lot of the the 0.5 revision was really just to that was like adding we changed like our wiring scheme, and we added voltage protection to everything because I wanted to get our repair costs down, and because it's not that we were getting a lot of them, but when people would plug in the wrong power supply, it was like a destructive failure, and I didn't feel good sending out like a burn board to people. So we would replace the circuit board and just charge people for the cost of parts. Because I didn't, I don't want to be like, hey, your pedal's fucked, I need $200. Like that doesn't feel right to me.
No.
And so I was like, all right, I want to not have this be a problem anymore. So spending an extra few bucks on the back end to have like voltage protection stuff made it a lot easier for us to scale up, because it meant that relative to the number of pedals going out the door, the total number of repairs is pretty close to when it was back in the early days when the circuits were simpler. And that makes life a lot easier. And a lot of companies don't bother with that. Frankly, it is easier to just say, okay, I'm going to order 10 extra boards, and if a repair comes in, I'm just going to throw it in the trash and reinstall it. And I totally understand that, but I just didn't feel good about it. I didn't really want to contribute to the electronics industry already has such a big waste footprint in general. I didn't want to make it worse, at least in whatever way we could. So that was the 0.5 thing, and we did the same thing with the Model Fed. We did it with the Halberds. Got it. Pretty much everything with sensitive power supply circuitry, which is like most of the shit we do these days, has that protection in it. So with great power comes great responsibility and all that. It's going to run at 24 volts. You don't want it to blow up, right?
True. Yeah. I was going to ask, when you mentioned sort of repairing amps earlier on, and I don't know if that's something that you're still doing, but you've got the Model FET, and you will have looked into sort of what's making those circuits tick, because I get the itch, and I just read like the schematics, and I'm just, it annoys me how simple amplifiers are, but the balance of how much it scares me that I could electrocute myself to death sort of balances it out a bit. But do you ever feel like that would be an avenue in the future you'd like to tinker in, or is it just not something that would appeal to you?
I mean, I think I get bit by the bug every once in a while. So I thought we were going to be an amp company, because I really, I was a big fan of Atomium amps, but also Dunwich amps. And I still have such a vast admiration for Nick's work, but especially back then there was this like mystique to it, and he gave me some good tips early on. Like he was the one who was like, hey, here's how you use Eagle, and here's how you order boards from Osh Park and all this stuff, was really, that was like the cornerstone of DIY pedals, like 5 to 8 years ago. And he gave me a lot of those resources, and he also helped me through my first tube amp build. I got a Weber kit, and it was a Weber kit for like a Sun 100S basically, and I rebuilt it with my own preamp design, and that design still exists. In fact, that prototype is over there. You can't see it, but it's sitting on top of the amp pile, and it's pretty cool. I wish, I've learned a lot of things about amps since then. What really I think is interesting about tube amps is that because of the characteristics of tubes themselves, very small changes to circuits can make a huge difference. And there are lots of things that are hidden inside tubes that you don't think about. Like, for instance, people talk about a thing called a grid stopper in a tube amp, and it's because at the grid of every tube, there is effectively a capacitor. And so by changing the resistor in front of a tube stage, you're changing the cutoff of a low-pass filter. But you're also changing the clipping characteristics of the tube, and you're also changing the point at which it starts to clip. And, there's lots of all this interactivity. And so people who tune tube amps in a particular way are spending a lot of time with making these small adjustments to the biasing and the coupling between stages. And, it's really remarkable how much sort of reading between the lines has to go into tube amp design. And I didn't really get a respect for that until much, much later. After I went through the ring around it in the solid state realm, and then coming back and saying, oh, wow, there's a lot of subtle complexity hidden in this. Because in a solid state circuit, you're assuming just, arbitrarily high bandwidth for everything. So it's all about hiding capacitors in places and tuning filters just right. In a tube amp, you get that for free if you know how to use it. And so I was always very fascinated by this, but never understood it until a lot later. I definitely want to do an amp someday, especially after having hung out with Chris Benson. I really want to do an amp someday. But I also know, again, as a result of hanging out with him and also, playing a bunch of like science amps and things like this, the bar is high. There's a lot of good stuff out there. And so if I were to ever do it, I'd have to really do it right. And that's exciting to me, and I would love to do it at some point. I think once I can kind of get in a coasting place with some of these like digitally controlled analog effects, the goal there is to be able to have stuff where I can kind of, right click save as and make a new pedal that's using the infrastructure and the code that we've written just for a different type of effect. Then I'm going to start thinking about tube amps again, because that will allow me to fulfill a dream that I had a long time ago and actually make some of this stuff. But it's easier to get into than one might think. It's harder to do it well. There's some great kits out there, and I think if you've got a good knowledge of tuning gain circuits, you can kind of start to intuit some of these things. And I'm always also happy to chat offline about this stuff, because I know more than I could ever put to use about it at this point, and would be happy to workshop ideas or anything like that. But it's a lot of fun. Also, getting shocked is part of the fun too.
Oh,
yeah,
man.
there is that element. It's the danger. Yeah, keeps it spicy.
Yep, exactly.
I've had a bad shock when I had this rack unit, a saturation thing with tubes in, and I was swapping the tubes, and no one told me to let it cool down once you've unplugged it.
Oh yeah, that'll get you. That'll get you.
Yeah, it was rough.
Yeah. I think when I was building my first amp, the parts showed up at like 5 p.m. on a Friday. I was sitting there all day, just like, I was just like sitting there at my kitchen table, just like drinking coffee, waiting for it to show up. And before I know it, it's like the evening, and the FedEx guy just drops his box off, and I was like, it is go time. And I was so excited that by the time the amp was ready to get powered on, it was like 4 a.m. And so I turned it on, and sparks fly, and my hand was resting on the chassis, and it got me pretty good. And at that point I was like, I need to go to bed. I need to go to sleep. And I need to think about this. And it was because I'd at the very last minute, I had swapped, the hot and ground wire on the incoming power inlet. And that was enough to, it was a very stupid mistake, but that's exactly the kind of mistake you make at 4 a.m. And that shock jolted me just awake enough to realize that I needed to go to sleep. So it was, it was great. But so as long as you don't do anything stupid, you can usually, you can usually be okay. And there's some basic quality of life stuff that people should tell you, like discharge your caps or let it cool down before, if people don't tell you that, then, it can be pretty dangerous. But the safety precautions are very few and very important, I would say.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's old technology, isn't it? Like tube amps have been around since the 40s. I guess prior to that, we're still building stuff off the back of those schematics. So it's not, it hasn't gone into that digital realm that other things. I mean, it has, but people are still have that affinity for those old school circuits.
Yep, and I think that's a really special thing. It's cool to see that technology still being put to such good use in so many different ways, and to see people continuing to quietly innovate too.
Yeah.
The fact that there are companies releasing new amp models that are really compelling is exciting to me. And those are people who really understand the history of those amps too, because there is obviously the Fender Marshall Vox lineage.
Yep.
Hiwatt gets an honorary mention, of course, though they've always kind of been underdogs in that realm. But there's lots of interesting like pre-60s designs that get forgotten about. There's like even people forget about like old Gibson tube amps, which are just remarkably good if you get the right ones. And but they weren't reliable and they weren't Fender, so they never quite caught on in the same way. So it's cool to like talk to people who have worked on a lot of amps and then have been like, well, I'm going to take all the best parts of these and combine that. I think that's a really special talent. Something that I think Varellin did really well. And something that Benson does well. Something that Alex at Science Amps does really well. Like Brian Sowers also, though he's kind of a rare case in that he was so obsessed with developing the perfect tube amp that he basically realized that the key to making a perfect tube amp is making a perfect transformer. And then he got so deep into transformers that he never came back out. And now it's just making transformers for other people. But he had this incredible realization that basically in the mid 60s, people invented plastic insulation. And the way to make a transformer is you have alternating layers of wire coils with insulation in between them. And the insulation is really important because if your transformer coil short out, it's not a transformer anymore, it's just a wire. But what he learned was that these if you've got a conductor with an insulator in between, that is a capacitor. And so the material that is insulating the windings of a transformer is integral to the sound of the transformer. When plastic insulation was invented, everybody switched to it, which meant that all transformers started to sound similar to one another. And it homogenized the sound of transformers across manufacturers and brands and even decades of amp manufacturing. And so what he's done is he's come up with ways to essentially like recreate these old insulation techniques using modern technology. And a lot of it is paper that is impregnated with certain chemicals to make it a better insulator. And so he's recreated all of these, but it was through like decades of disassembling old amps and understanding their transformers that made this possible. And so now you can say, oh, well, I want a recreation of, an early Partridge transformer that like maybe Hiwatt would have used, but pre-Captain tape. And so he can create the winding forms and the actual windings for it and have those same like, unique alternating layers. And there's lots of unique like physical, like the way that the coils are sort of, interwoven with one another has a huge effect on the sound. And he's studied and understood all this stuff. I got to visit his shop when I was out in Portland, and I was like, there's a level of understanding to this that I didn't even think was possible. I thought a transformer was just a bunch of wire. And the bigger the hunk of metal it was wrapped around, the better the transformer sounds. Which, to first order is kind of true. We can thank the Sun Brothers for that one. But it was so fascinating to hear about that stuff. And that's another thing. Like that's not on a schematic. The schematic's got the part of the transformer. But there's so much art in the design of these things that without Brian might have actually just been lost. And so he's been doing a lot of fascinating work in recreating all these different technologies. So pretty amazing stuff, really.
Yeah, that sounds super impressive. Yeah, I'd love to peek that workshop. I imagine that's a treasure trove of really interesting stuff.
Oh my God, it was cool. I could have spent a whole day there if I had the time to. It was really, really something.
Oh yeah, I wanted to just check in about Eldritch Blast and how that came about, because we heard from Alec a little bit about it, and I don't know, it's such an interesting pedal.
Well, thank you. That one, that's an interesting one because so I had this circuit that I open sourced called Magic Missile. More D&D references. The rabbit hole continues. And it was kind of me being like, okay, here's like an homage to like the Deviever Escobedo thing, like sort of piggybacking transistors backwards on one another to like do something that's almost an analog octave, but not quite. And Alec really took a shine to that circuit. And I had this one particular prototype that sounded way better than the others, and I didn't know why. And so I just sent it to him to like mess around with. And he had this idea to maybe do like a deluxe version of it and release it as a collab. And so we did exactly that. I kind of let Alec take the reins on it, and as his company has matured, obviously he's become a lot more of a peer. But early on, it was kind of like I was like sort of mentoring him and helping him out.
Yeah.
And now he's very much got his own identity, which is awesome to see. Like that company, like he's like kind of one of the authorities on weird fuzzes these days, and so it was cool to work with him in that capacity. And so we did like an initial run, and then we did a second run, and every time we would iterate on it a little bit. But finally, I was like, I took like a really deep dive into it, and I was like, can we change a few things on this? And that was what became the version 2. There was sort of like a version 1 and then like a tweaked version 1, like just these gradual iterations. And I really wanted to get more muscle out of the HM2 EQ thing. And I was really pleased with it at the time. And then we kind of found out that like people were missing some of the stuff from the original. And I was like, well, I don't know what they're talking about. And finally, in preparation for this current batch, Alec and I sat down and really talked a lot about what the design meant to either of us and what we were trying to achieve with it. And we actually learned quite a bit. So when he was able to come out here and hang out in person, it was really interesting for us to sit down and like get this thing exactly where we wanted it. And so that was the version that we're now making, which I think is really like the definitive one, because it's got the unruliness and the gain of the original one, but it's got the cool foot switchable EQ of the versions that we've been making previously. And but it was interesting to like dial all that in, and it was actually motivated because I made a mistake on the circuit board for the most recent revision, and so we were going to have to get in there with a couple of bodge wires anyway. And I said, all right, well, we might as well tune this thing while we're together and like really just get that right. And so we kind of were able to finish it from there. I think the only that was also where the improved chaos mod came about. Was the original chaos was a gate sort of thing, but it was like a gate where if you played it would kind of like sputter and arpeggiate down.
Oh wow!
And but then when I improved the EQ, it made the gate stop working, and I didn't really. I always thought it was just a regular gate, so I didn't think that much about it. But Alec was like, "Oh, we definitely lost something here." And so that was when I said, well, what if we make it a circuit bend instead? Because all we have to do is lift a resistor off and then hook it somewhere else. And that really kind of gave the pedal a new life. And now the question is, there's been much internal debate about this, is to the extra foot switch had been the chaos foot switch all along. And it would take another revision. So it's like, well, how many times do we tweak this thing? But we've certainly thought about it. Because it could be fun. But yeah, that was an interesting one. I really like how that thing sounds. And it gets... you could do that kind of like nasty, like high passed thing really well, which we all love. But then that EQ can give it like a really huge, like low end, which is also really fun. So yeah, it's a weird pedal. I'm glad we got to do it. It's been, it was especially nice to have Alec out here to really, properly hang out. That dude, he's such a sweetheart, and just fun to be around, just endless enthusiasm for life and guitar and fuzz pedals, and Good kid for sure.
I just hung out with him this past weekend for the first time.
Oh yeah, that's right, because y'all were playing out in Pittsburgh.
Yeah,
that's awesome. Yeah,
he's great. He's just ray of sunshine.
I know. I don't know where he gets it.
No, I don't know. I would love it.
Yeah. But yeah, brilliant dude too, for sure.
Well, we should probably wrap up.
Oh yeah. Like I said, I could probably do this all day, but I've got a disgusting number of emails that I'm probably going to have to get to after not doing any email work this weekend. So gotta love it. Yeah, that's business, I would certainly rather be doing this.
Yeah. Well, we got to do a part 2 or something sometime.
You know where to find me. I know. I feel like we barely scratched the surface too.
Yeah, so. Absolutely. Oh, well, thanks so much for coming on, and it's just been so interesting to hear everything. And every guest we've had so far has name dropped you on every episode. So it was like we got to get him on.
Hey, made a lot of good friends, I'm sure you two would have got me on here one way or another anyway. So totally works out. But yeah, you've had Evan and Alec both on here so far.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a damn good crew as far as I'm concerned.
Hell yeah.
Amazing.
All right. Well, thank you both.
Thanks so much, John.
Of course. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I'll talk to you both soon.
Yeah, I'll catch you soon.
All right. Cheers, gentlemen.
Thanks, buddy.
Cheers.
So, because we're so professional, we completely forgot to ask John to plug his socials. So, Simon is going to do that right now.
You can find more information about Electronic Audio Experiments at Electronic Audio Experiments on the socials and www.eae.zone.